Just a little background on the truck, because I don't think I've ever done it yet. The front frame section is out of a 2007 Dodge 3500 dually. It's got rack and pinion, obviously, which is, I think this generation was the first generation that came with a rack and pinion in a big truck. And it's got disc brakes. And then the rear half of it actually comes off of a 2001 cab and chassis model. And it's got a narrowed Dana 80. I think something like 6 inches narrower on each side off the top of my head. I could be completely wrong. But basically it's getting a triangulated forelink with this support brace. It's going to be the top mounting points for the triangulation, and the lower forelink bars are going to come from the outside of the frame here and run back to underneath where the leaf spring perch currently mounts. So that's it as far as the frame goes. The drivetrain is a 2001 24 valve Cummins with a P pump on it, and it's going to be running Borg-Warner S370, I think, and an S475 compound setup. It's got the NV4500 that I completely tore apart and replaced all the synchros in. It already had the 5th gear fix and everything all done to it. One interesting challenge that is going to be coming up is going to be the shift linkage. I have to be able to shift this from inside the cab. So I've got a couple ideas, but I won't be able to say for sure if any of them will work until I actually start putting stuff together. So other than that, gonna need a nice little short drive shaft. I think maybe 3 feet at most. And I'm probably gonna be getting that made in the next week or so, maybe 2. The back half of it is gonna have a flatbed. I haven't decided yet if it's gonna be always angled or if it's going to lay down flat. It really depends on where the cab sits and also how high I want the flatbed in the level position, because obviously the motor sits at the front of the flatbed, so a constantly angled flatbed would be a simpler option. And as far as everything else, you already know I'm putting on air suspension. I'm running some airlift bags in the front, and in the back, because I still want to have some load capacity, I'm going to be running bags off of like a Peterbilt or a Kenworth truck. And it's a rolling sleeve design. It supports a ton of weight. It's what I use on my tilt trailer that I made. And I have a custom set of 22-inch Alcoa wheels that I'm going to run on it as well. And I'll give you a little peek at what those look like. All right, so these are the wheels that I'm going to be running on the COE. They're pretty awesome. I'm going to be getting lug nuts to mount them probably Monday or Tuesday. I'm also receiving a lot of the forelink stuff this week, or at least I should be. I'm expecting it. And so I'll be pulling the rear axle out and probably stripping off some of the back bracketry from the leaf springs. I'm going to have to relocate one of the shock mounts on the axle because space is tight due to the fact that it is narrowed quite a bit. Well, it's Sunday. I just got home from work and I've kind of worked myself into a corner as far as fabricating goes. I've got the lower control arms taken off, and I've removed the bushings out of them and also the ball joints. You can see I pressed these guys out, and I also pushed out the old ball joints and pushed in new ones. I'm still waiting on bushings, and for today's project I'm going to go ahead and pull the steering rack off and rebuild it. I've got new outers, inners, and sleeves, and I'm also going to replace the upper control arms. So let's get started. Well, I thought I pressed record for the time lapse, but it turns out I just took a photo. Anyways, the steering rack's out of there. Those were some of the hardest bolts I've ever had to break loose. And now that it's on the ground here, I'm just going to take off the lines and then go ahead and remove the boots see if we can't get those inner tie rods off. And this time, hopefully I'll remember to press record. So I decided to leave the fittings on the steering rack and just cut the ends and crimp them, as you may have seen. And the reason why is because I'm not going to be hooking lines up to it for a good while, and I'm still going to be doing a lot of fabricating and creating dust in general. So just capping them off like that is going to be better, considering I'm not even going to use these fittings anyways for my custom setup. So now we're going to remove the boots and see if we can't get these tie rods off. Right, so we got the boots off, and looks like we just gotta get a wrench big enough to fit onto there, and hopefully we'll be able to twist off the entire tie rod assembly. The inner tie rods aren't really too worn on this one. The outers are shot, but I have new ones, so I'm just gonna go ahead and use them. The good news is the seals on the rack are okay. No fluid seepage, so at least, you know, upgrading the tie rods is all we really need. This one still feels nice and firm. Unfortunately, this one's bent, so that's why we're changing them. Well, the power steering rack is a little awkward to hold and also torque on with a big wrench, so I had to do a little, you know, footwork with it to get those inner tie rods broken off and new ones installed, but the job is done. So now we're going to throw the rubber boots on, and then we'll throw the outer tie rods on and put it back on the truck. We are all together in one piece. And gonna go ahead and throw it back on the truck now. Working on these big trucks, you don't use a lot of small wrenches, so I feel like a giant turning this little guy. Power steering rack's back in, and all we're waiting on now is new wheel bearings, because they were completely shot. And I actually removed the wheel bearings yesterday. I had one real fun time doing that. And as far as the lower control arms, I got the lower ball joints completely replaced. I didn't get any footage of it. It was also real fun. And I also replaced the sway bar links. I think we might have the front end back together and lifting itself on air maybe in 2 or 3 days. We'll find out. I can't believe I actually thought I ran out of stuff to do. So I started looking over the drivetrain, and I realized I still have to fabricate the adapter to go from a T3 to a T4 for the new secondary turbo I'm going to be running. So the reason why I have to do that is, as you can see, this is the outlet size on the Cummins 6BT turbo manifold. It's called a T3, and as you can see, it does not fit this turbo, which is a T4, because the original turbo runs a smaller turbine housing. So what I did was I went and got a T4 flange and a T3 flange, and I picked up some stainless steel 10 gauge sheet. And what I'm gonna do is just design an adapter that also allows me to place this JGS wastegate in between the manifold and the secondary turbo so that it can bypass the exhaust gas to the primary turbo at the right PSI. So first thing we'll do is bolt this flange up to the exhaust manifold on the Cummins, and then we will start mocking up where we want the turbo to sit and this flange. So let's get started. Okay, I got the flange bolted on there. It's a good fit. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring the turbo over here, and we're gonna try and position it as close to the block as possible, just because you know, we want to keep everything kind of compact and tucked away so that we can get as much room as we possibly can underneath the flatbed. And also the larger turbo will probably be sitting up here directly above it. So let's grab the turbo and see what we can do. All right, as you can see, gotten a little creative with the placement. I decided to run it backwards, and the reason why is because I got to thinking, and on most traditional vehicles, the only reason why the turbo faces forward is so the exhaust can go out the back. And on my particular build, the exhaust is going to be going out a stack behind the cab. So this actually really makes sense. And essentially what's going to happen is, so like I was saying, the exhaust is going to come out of the motor. It's going to go into this turbo. This wastegate is going to be placed here to relieve pressure once this turbo reaches its maximum PSI, which I think is somewhere around like 30 or 32. And the exhaust gas that the wastegate bypasses is going to end up feeding into this larger turbo, which is also going to be fed off of the exhaust gas from the smaller turbo. So that's how a compound setup works. And this big guy is going to be sitting up here. The exhaust is going to come out of here, feed into that flange right there, and then the wastegate will also feed into that flange. And from the back side of that turbo is just going to be one big stack that goes behind the cab. And first thing we're going to have to do is make the adapter. So it's probably just going to be a little bit of a curve here, and it shouldn't be too difficult to make. Let's give it a shot.